Hello. This has been a challenging week for so many of us. And it's not the first challenging week we've had. It's the challenging week after 40 challenging weeks before us. It's been a time that we are continually being presented with shocking, upsetting, distressing things on the societal level, and also, challenging things, upsetting things, upheavals in our personal lives because of the pandemic, because of, things that are going on in the national forum about decisions that are being made and how people are being impacted by this. So I'm recording this on Friday, January the 8th, 2021. And I just wanted to connect with all of you about navigating times when it feels like the world is falling apart. And in my personal life, I don't like to make the work about me, but in my personal life, since just before Christmas, after a year of a lot of stressful events, in terms of the health and relationships I have in my private sphere, I had some really, really upsetting news about a challenge, a really frightful diagnosis that one of my children has received. And I've been really sitting with this presence of very personal, like this personal crisis, this personal diagnosis that, can be a life or death diagnosis. And what that means to me as a mother. And, I don't like to make the work about me, but but I'm sitting here, talking about fear, and it's important for you to understand, that fear has been something in a personal form that's been very present for me for 2020, and certainly kind of culminated, and on as 2020 was finishing up, it brought something that is even more fearful and distressing into my personal life. So give that context that, I can empathize. I have so much empathy for what all of you are going through, whether it's a health crisis of your own or someone else, or a financial crisis. I've certainly been through dire financial crises in my life and lost everything. I understand from the perspective of someone who has been through these things. I also understand as someone who is a survivor of sexual violence and trauma, and really powerful early adverse childhood events. I understand from that perspective of someone who has walked through these things. I know this is not easy. I know fear is real. I know how fear can just move in with us and paralyze us. And I understand that fear is not something we can deny. We can't just say, oh, fear doesn't exist. Or, it's like, don't be afraid. Fear is the victim of success. Or so is it fear is the opposite of success? I disagree. I really believe that fear is necessary for success, whether it's managing a chronic illness or succeeding in your career choice. I think if we are in relation to fear and understanding the power of fear and why fear is beneficial, then we can work with fear, much in the same way that we learn to, be in relation to our shadow self, as opposed to denying our shadow attributes. To deny our fears really allows them to overtake us, because fear will persist until it gets our attention. It's just like the shadow. It is the major source of shadow fuel. And as long as we pretend we're not afraid, or pretend that we can't deal with our fears, that we feel the fears are stronger than us, that it'll persist. It is a teacher. And if you're a Hecatean and you're involved with our beloved goddess Hekate, that She is phoboros, she is fear. She is the bringer of fear, because fear is a teacher. That being said, when fear overtakes our lives, it paralyzes us and we can't solve the problem. And when fear becomes a teacher, we say, oh, I am absolutely terrified of this diagnosis. I do not know what will happen. I could lose the person I am closest to in the whole world because of this situation. And acknowledge that fear and the emotions that come with it. Shed the tears, get quiet for a few days, and acknowledge and honor the fear. And then say, what can I do? Given that the fear is real, that this is a genuine threat, what can I do to make the situation better? How can I transmute the phoboros, the fear, into agape, love, the healing energy of love that is active and about doing things in the world, about learning to cope with situations better, about perhaps leaning into Hekate as Anima Mundi, as the soul, and turning inward to our soul to see how our soul wishes for us to cope with this catastrophe that we're dealing with. And how do we choose love without robbing fear of its rightful place in our life? I think that is so vital. We see so much of this toxic positivity, this white light only business that doesn't acknowledge or give fear the respect that fear deserves. And I think this is underlying why we have so many anxiety disorders in this day and age. There's a lot of other things, but part of it is the addiction to artificial light and positivity, right? This is the problem. Life is fundamentally not designed to only be beautiful, abundant, happy times. That is not what life is. And as long as we persist in that false belief, we'll always be in fear, because most of us, like none of us actually live that way. It's, we learn to be joyful, we learn to be present, we learn to be content in relation to our tragedies, in relation to our fear, in relation to the shadow. And until we say, hey, fear, I see you, I acknowledge you, let's work together to get through this, then fear is just going to take you over. It's the shadow. And that is a huge fundamental shift. It doesn't happen overnight, but it can happen. And it can be such a beautiful deepening of your understanding of yourself and of each other, because that really comes to one of the three values or principles I talk about in the Keeping Your Keys book. I said a coffee cup on my coffee the other day. So the values that I talk about in the book are kindness, passion and integrity, or passion, kindness, and integrity within the structure of the book, which focuses on the three cells, the root, heart, and crown. So when we have, we have passion at the root so that we're energized and enlivened about what we do. And we have kindness at the heart so that our actions towards ourselves and others are kind. Sometimes kind can be very tough. Kind does not mean weak. And then have integrity in our mind, and that we work to be right-minded and fair towards ourselves and others as much as possible. So I really recommend, studying those lessons and taking me up on the challenge to creating more values for you. One of my core values is curiosity and studying the world and learning new things. And that really helps to assuage my own fear, is if I learn with limits about whatever it is the challenge is, and discernment. And, one is the tension of opposites. You can be very fearful and also be very loving. And that is really what I believe that the principles I talk about in the book help us achieve, if we are willing to live them, if we are willing to do the daily meditation, in the book, there's a written form of the meditation. If you go to the Keeping Your Keys SoundCloud and click on the Anamera playlist, you'll find an audio version that you can dive into. I believe there's also on the YouTube channel a video version of a demonstration of the different hand movements that you can add to deepen the meditation. But the meditation at its core is very simple. I unify my root, my heart, and my crown, my emotions, my actions, and my thoughts. And that is the awakening of the deeper self. We can see it as a serpent. And the serpent within us is so wise, it's so feeling, it understands that fear and love can occupy the same place. And that when they occupy the same place, we need to tip the scales towards love. We need to transmute that fear to love. And in the book, I also have an exercise, that's what I call it in the book, on how to transmute fear to love using Hecate's epithets. So this exercise, when I wrote this exercise, I'd already tried it out on a course that I was teaching and knew that it was a very powerful experience, because I don't ever include anything in my books that haven't been tested out by my students, because I want to make sure that what's been devised and what's been presented is going to achieve the outcome that I talk about. It's not just me writing, it's based on evidence, always evidence. So in this exercise is feeling the power of the epithets. It's on page 79, if you have your copy of the Keeping Your Keys book handy. So I present this as an exercise where the student goes through loving emotions, kindness, contentment, joy, so on. Fear emotions, anger, not the compassionate kind, I added. Despair, depression, anxiety, loneliness, sadness, and rage. And then we move on, and it's really designed to be done over the course of a week, that you're exploring your own emotions, labeling your own emotions. How am I feeling right now? Doing those self-check-ins that are so important. I'm angry right now. Why am I angry? Oh, I'm feeling really kind of content right now. Why am I feeling content? And doing that journaling, so we start to understand our own emotions, our own root. Emotions are situated in the root, the intuition, deep in the belly, the gut feeling, that tingling sensation you get way down low. And then I talk about like how to do this exercise. So I mentioned several fear-based epithets of Hekate, Atastalos, which can be translated as wicked, Nikya, night walker, which was associated with her kind of roaming the territory, looking for the unworthy or treacherous victims. Phoboros, which is fearful, which kind of acknowledges that although Hekate is fierce and often invokes fear in others who are not in her favor, that she also can be fearful. Palomenos, which is sufferer, that Hekate can bear our suffering. Her darkness, is so vast. She can take all of our suffering on as well. Parapnoa, which is fire breather, which can be very fierce in terms of dragon energy. And Scotia, which is gloomy darkness and is associated with the ancient temple of Hekate in Alexandria, and also the goddess and the Egyptian princess Skoda, who founded, legend says, founded Scotland. So those are underworld energy and represented by the color black in terms of how the exercise is done in the book. I wanted to design the exercise in the book that was something that you could all safely do. You could explore fear without going in too deep, because we don't want that. We want you to be able to face fear in terms of working with these currents of Hecate that are represented by these epithets, these titles of her that come to us from ancient texts, but not go in too deep. So we can be possessed by fear. So exploring fear in a safe way. And then we move on to some love-based epithets, agleos, pleasing, eratokos, a bearer of love, sometimes spelled with one T and sometimes spelled with two T's. Caliste, fairest. Melanoe, soothing. Peonios, healer. And Teletos, patient. Very loving epithets. And for the purpose of the exercise of the book, I situated those in the upper world as something we can contemplate with the mind. So fear is something of the belly, moving the energy up to the mind, pulling it into consciousness, love. So you can see fear as a reaction, that gut response, and then moving the energy into the mind where it's like, I can choose love. And then we used white in that exercise, in this version of this exercise. And then there's a text. I said, prepare space in yourself, as you learned in previous exercises and so on. Ask Hekate to let you temporarily feel the energy of your chosen fear-based epithets, whatever three you pick from the list. So we start with fear. We want to acknowledge fear, and then we're going to transmute fear through love. So there's a recitation here. Hail Hekate, guardian. Hail Hekate, guide. Hail Hekate, gatekeeper. Protect me, guide me, open the gate of understanding. May I feel the power of your epithets to better know myself and you. Excuse me. And then you chant the epithets that you chose, your fear-based epithets, and then you destroy them in a symbolic act. And now we move on to the love. So we repeat the same petition. Hail Hekate, guardian. Hail Hekate, guide. Hail Hekate, gatekeeper. Cleanse this space of all the energy of the fear-based epithets. Release their power from me. And then we repeat the whole process of the ritual with the love-based ones. And then we end by saying, may your love energy remain with me. Thank you for your presence at my working. And then we journal and so on, to understand the imagery that came up as we were in presence with the fear epithets, and then as we were in presence with the love epithets. So that is the Agape Phoboros exercise as it's presented in the Keeping Her Keys book. Because I feel this transmutation act of becoming aware of fear and then choosing love is so vital to our functioning, both in our psychological functioning and how we conduct ourselves within our relationships, which are so vital to our well-being, but also how we connect to Hekate and the deeper world, that by understanding fear and acknowledging fear and choosing love, that we ultimately get to a place where we are loving. And even when, we become outraged, for example, because our outrage is often a fear reaction, or we become anxious and kind of paralyzed and we're on the couch with a blanket and it's like, we just can't handle the world today. That when we give voice to that, and even if it's just to ourselves, even if we just say, I am so terrified of this, just acknowledge it and overcome that really toxic tendency we have in our society to deny fear and all of its different faces: anger, aggression, despair, anxiety, depression, distress, withdrawal, and so on. As long as we pretend that those things shouldn't exist, that they don't have a rightful place as teachers in our lives, then we run the risk of being possessed by them and overtaken by them. And we see this, right, in the societal world now. We see horrible marauders, terrorists, invaders who are in the grips of aggression because they were absolutely terrified. And they were driven to this terror and manipulated, and it was exacerbated. We see this, and we see it on the news, and it's like, there's no accepting what was done, but that too can teach us, like, oh, look what out of control shadow does, right? Out of control shadow, and someone who is a narcissist, manipulator, psychopath will take advantage of that. And how many times, even in our personal lives, maybe we've gotten involved in a romantic relationship with someone when we were very much in shadow mode, and they just took advantage of us, right? They just ate us for all they could. Let's learn from that. Let's not give the attention to the ones who are fear mongers. Let's not approve of the ones who are violent because they're so possessed by fear. The way we change the world is by changing ourselves and under being in relation to our fear, acknowledging it, not seeing it as something that we can't control or something greater than us. When we learn to have our fear instead of our fear having us, then we're choosing love. And, it's agape, it's pure love. It's not like airy fairy, let's white light the world, um, you know, let's do away with all conflict. Conflict is part of the energy fabric of the world. And that's why for so many, I believe that Hekate resonates because Hekate is a full figure. She is soul. So she has conflict. She has compassion. She has all these things within her as the world soul. And to deny that conflict, anger, fear is part of who we are is to just it just leads to like this disasters that we see ourselves in, on the societal level. We've experienced it in our own lives, when we've pretend like, I don't want to deal with that, I need to be avoidant, I need to do this, and we're not conscious. And becoming into consciousness, that is when we are coming into Hecate. That is when we are aligning to soul within us, and also her as the primal force that fuels the world. When we become conscious of our fears, they no longer have us, we have them. And that's not to say that, depression isn't debilitating, that anxiety disorders don't exist. It is saying that these things exist and we can learn to work with them and be in relation to them, as opposed to just, slapping on more medications or pretending they don't exist, and so on. There is a way that we as soulful creatures, um, perhaps identifying with the archetype of the witch, so we're something of the deeper world, that we can say, oh yes, anxiety, fear, so on has a place in the world. It brings our attention to a matter that needs to be dealt with. And we are so much greater than that. You can find the Agape Phobos meditation, which I highly recommend. People really find it transformative. You can find that on the Keeping Your Keys SoundCloud, again, in the Anamara course, in the Anamara playlist. The lesson is in the book. Read the book, do the 13 lessons of the book. They will fundamentally change your life. If you want to go deeper, we have the official Keeping Your Keys book study group in my school called the Covina Institute. So many lessons there. You can join Covina also to go, deeper into your studies. We have many programs of study that you can pursue, from, working with spirits to going into your own psychology for deeper healing. And we also have live monthly events that you can join as well. Our next one on the full moon in January is the Full Moon Wolf Lodge, where we return to our true wildness, our nature. So that's one of my favorites that we do every January. Thank you so much for listening to this special kind of episode. I wish you love, true love, that is about passion, kindness, and integrity.